Hi, I'm Kevin and this is my 1984 Nissan Skyline that I've kind of just been tinkering around with over the couple of years I've had it. It's a DR30, so there's a lot of confusion. People think it's a R31 when in actual fact it's an R30 with a facelift on it. It's got the FJ20 engine, turbocharged as well, so it was the top spec, but I've kind of took everything that made it a top spec model, such as the aircon, the adjustable dampers and all that, out of it. So it's kind of still got the RSX on it, but it's not really an RSX anymore with what I've done to it. Bought the car in 2018, early 2018. The car itself has been in the country since 2017, but I'm its first UK owner. I had my eye on it for 6 months and then went, yeah, I'll get that. I wanted something different and this kind of fit the bill and something that I could get my teeth into, and yeah, now I've modified it and semi-restored it. Yeah. So when I went to first look at the car itself, it was, on the outside, it looked pretty decent. I could see it had a respray because it had a body kit and everything on it, and I was like, okay, I can live with that. It's nice enough paintwork, it might shine up, I could do whatever with it. And then having a look underneath it, I was expecting, oh, there might be some rust, I might have to deal with some of that. Turns out, really good condition. I was like, I'm gonna put my deposit on this straight away. It's been hung around, but I want it now because it fits what I want it to be. And yeah, even when I did start stripping it apart, 2 small rust issues. One was on the boot lid, which was inevitable on the little seal. And then there was one little pocket where it accumulated some leaves over its time and caused a little rust hole. But again, I patched that up and she's pretty solid. So on the outside of the car, the first major thing that I've changed on it is obviously the colour. It was white. White is a nice colour, but I did want something a bit different. So I went for Nardo Grey for 2 reasons. One, I like the colour. I saw one R30 on a picture on Google, and I just loved it in grey, all grey, just with black trim, and I went, I like the look of that. And then number 2, because I resprayed it myself, I wanted a colour that if I broke through when flatting and polishing it, it still kind of looks like primer, just shiny. So I cheated a little bit that way, but grey was the colour I went for. I did, on the front bumper itself, I've kind of semi-modified that in that it can kind of come off as a clamshell kind of thing, mainly so I can get it on trailers for when that eventuality does happen. Because it's a very long nose on the car, so I wanted to be able to get that up and off quite easily. So a detachable front and a tube front underneath there, so that it mounts everything like the intercooler and that. The wheels are Watanabe RS8s. This year I got the lips and barrels done on the backside, just so that they kind of fit, and I'm not using a big old 2-inch spacer to kind of make it fill the arches. So doing all the maths for that was quite daunting to make sure I got it right, but they do fit quite nicely. They have been powder coated like a gunmetal grey, so I kind of like the look of that compared to just the normal black centres, that kind of thing. I thought, let's have a different bronzy gunmetal colour in there so that it offsets everything. The interior of the car is pretty much as it came from when I bought the car. I've done a couple tidy up jobs, mainly with like wiring. I put the ECU into the glove box just to kind of make it accessible, because it used to be under the driver's seat just rattling around, and I thought that's probably not the best place for it. The half cage that's in there, it used to have padding on it, and a nice little remnant of its past, when I was taking all the padding that had gone brittle and hard off, I found a Skyline sticker underneath there, and I thought that was quite cute. I put a extinguisher in there as well, just to be safe. But yeah, the interior is pretty much as it was. There's some nice retro Pioneer speakers on the parcel shelf, so that yeah, kind of got those 80s vibes going with it. Yeah. So the engine that's in it is a FJ20 ET. I've put a fairly big whole set turbo on it. It's essentially a tractor turbo, but seeming that I did most of the work in a farm workshop, it kind of feels fitting. It's not actually too laggy, which I was quite surprised with. I was willing to accept a laggy turbo just to have a big one there. but it spools up reasonably nicely for such a small 2-litre engine with a big turbo on it. The manifold, myself and my friend Gavin, who's a welder, we kind of fabricated a jig and everything to make that up with, so that it could kind of have a twin scroll setup in there. All the intercooler piping we welded up together as well with various pie cuts. Mishimoto radiator, intercooler, pretty much everything Mishimoto. And yeah, just kind of tinkered around with it and modified it as and how needed. So it's a very functional bay in that you can tell it's been made by an individual, not by a factory. But I kind of like the fact that it's a bit homemade in there, because that's kind of how I think of cars. It's nice to have something that's a bit one-off. No one else has got something the same as it. It's a bit unique that way. Yeah. I'd say the biggest difficulty was definitely painting it. I'm definitely not a painter. All the time spent sanding, flatting, filling. It was a straight body as it was, but I give praise to any painter. I have not got the patience for it. This is the one and only car that I'm respraying ever in my life. But it was a good experience. I've learnt a lot of how to paint stuff, really. And yeah, it was a fun experience, but a very difficult one at that, yeah. Being a very rare car in the UK, it's quite difficult to get parts. Luckily, there's a couple models that kind of suit, and you can find equivalents, but the majority of parts I've either had to fabricate, reverse engineer, or just kind of hope that I can find it from, say, Australia, Japan, wherever. Like the fuel rail that's in it, that had to come from Australia along with the injectors, because obviously the FJ20 over here is a bit of a rarity. So I'd say anything engine related is definitely the hardest part to find anything with, and I'm still looking for a spare engine. The car's purpose is pretty much a weekend driver, and I go to a couple car shows with it. I kind of hope that it makes it to the car show there and back, but I do keep tools in the back just in case for those scenarios. So it's definitely an ongoing project. It's never gonna not be finished, and there's always bits I want to change here and there. Me and a couple of friends were going to a Jap show at Santa Pod. As you do when you're in convoy, you kind of overtake each other to get a couple nice rolling shots and hear each other's engines. So Mike had a go with his Integra. Obviously that sounded really nice. I then went to overtake my friend in his RX-7, and I pushed reasonably hard, and I thought, yeah, it's going nicely, and then suddenly a poof. And not a very good poof at that. Basically the coolant bottom radiator hose had popped off because the Jubilee clip had stripped and failed, and dumped all its coolant onto the exhaust right into Mitch's face. And his immediate reaction was, that doesn't smell good, that smells like coolant. As that happened, there was a lay-by that we could pull into, so we did a roadside Halfords run. Thank you, Michael, for grabbing the coolant and grabbing the Jubilee clips, and then did a roadside fix on it. So we make a good team for that, I think. But yeah, it was definitely a bit of a headache-inducing one, in that having a coolant leak as massive as that suddenly happened, and then the scared moment where what's gone wrong, the engine's still running, but there's no coolant. The sad thing with that was we was only 10 minutes away from Santa Pod, so I think everyone who was going to there saw us on the side of the road. So yeah, if you saw us, hi, that's me. Yeah, so that's quite a fun story, I think, with it, and that was only a couple of months ago. Yeah. On the street, with it being a very loud car, you get a lot of people kind of rubbernecking around with it, and you get a couple of people go, oh, what's that? But generally, I think because it's a loud car, people just kind of go, oh, it's another loud car. But I think those that do see it as, oh, that's a bit different, do find a bit of enjoyment with it. At car shows, I think most people, I've not went to any car shows properly in it, I've only kind of went to one or two. Most people just wonder what it is, because it often gets confused between an R31 and R30, but it is an R30, it's not quite as new as an R31. I haven't won any awards with the car, just mainly because it's not been out, I think, but also it is a DIY thing, so it's never going to win best paint. It's probably never going to win tidiest engine bay, because it is quite a DIY project, but I hope that it kind of gets a lot of good attention just by being a rare car that someone's had enjoyment out of, I guess.
But not only is this car absolutely incredible in terms of the build, the quality, it's also old, and that's a massive factor of keeping a car going to that extent. When it's old, it's a bigger challenge. So this goes to the DR30 Skyline down the bottom on this very one. Absolutely amazing.
I think probably one of my biggest achievements was accidentally sneaking into the Yakushi show and shine, because I turned up and the guy directing all the traffic said, "Oh yeah, you can go into the show and shine." Never entered it for show and shine, but yeah, I'll take that. The car itself is a lot stiffer than any other car I've ever driven before. I have got the suspension set quite stiff so that it can kind of be quite low and it won't scrub. But it does also mean that we have to go to the toilet every half an hour because it shakes our bladders. That's the one downside they don't say about lowered and modified cars, is the fact that you need to pee all the time as a result. But yeah, it's definitely a lot less comfortable than the daily. The top speed of the car is obviously the national speed limit, but on private roads I've occasionally got it up to about 90 to 100, and it feels like it could do more, but I don't want to tempt fate with that because it's something I've made myself. I would estimate the power is somewhere around 300 horsepower. I've mapped it myself just to kind of get it running, done all the timing, etc. And it runs reasonably okay, but just very rich at the moment. I'm happy with that. It's a nice cruiser around car. It's not really going to be anything more than a toy to play with. I'm not going to chase big numbers because a car like this doesn't need big numbers around it. Personally, I would say I'm most pleased with how the paint has turned out for a DIY job. For the fact I did it in a farm shed and it doesn't look too bad. Like up close it's got some defects, I'll fully hold my hands up to that. But I am pleased as to how the paint has turned up, and especially for how shiny it is, I've got to give all the credit to my girlfriend Laura, who's a detailer. She corrected quite a lot of what I did wrong. But yeah, that's I think probably my biggest achievement in there, is being able to have something that looks half decent.